Greetings, my good bitches. The name's Francis, Coke Francis. I'm an editor, comedy writer, drag artist, and I'm here because I'm tired of being asked if I'm ever going to audition for RuPaul's Drag Race. I'm also tired of being asked how I feel about each season because there's a new one every 3 weeks and a new one in a new country every 3 months, and it's fucking impossible to keep up. And because, as the title of this video mentions, I have officially decided to stop watching Drag Race. I'm ecstatic that Drag Race is an actual show and a cultural phenomenon. I'm genuinely amazed that we're able to even have a show like this on television that so openly celebrates the art of drag and queerness in general. And just because I don't watch the show anymore does not mean I take any of this for granted, especially because it debuted in 2009, a time when I stopped getting invited to sleepovers because the other children were afraid I was gonna gay them in their sleep. Bitch, don't flatter yourself. It's very near and dear to my heart in that regard. But in recent years, we've drifted apart. And as they say, it's not personal, it's drag. Actually, it is kind of personal, but I figured I would quote the show so that you guys know that I'm not completely talking out of my padded ass. But before we get into why, if you are a fan of watching a very tired drag queen talk about nerd shit forever, I ask that you please gently untuck yourself to avoid any unnecessary injuries, but mostly so that you're still able to dick slap those like and subscribe buttons as hard as you can. Now, before I even start this video, I just want to preface that if you still watch Drag Race and you love it or stan it or whatever the kids these days say, that is perfectly fine. I'm not the emperor of drag. I'm not going to tell you what you should or shouldn't do with your life. This is just my personal list of grievances with a show that I have watched since its inception. This is not an attack on the contestants in any way. If anything, I have nothing but good things to say about these queens, even when Tyra Sanchez briefly flirted with terrorism back in 2018. And yeah, let's get into it. RuPaul's Drag Race started out as a transgressive, no-budget series that was designed to basically be a drag version of America's Next Top Model, which I don't know if you've seen this, but lately there's a bunch of Gen Zers finding out about America's Next Top Model for the first time and witnessing the hilariously problematic era that was 2000s model culture. Oh, and the fact that Tyra Banks is actually out of her fucking mind. Long before the flashy production values you see on Drag Race today, during its humble beginnings, it looked like season 1 of the Eric Andre show, and not as an aesthetic choice, I think. The standards were insanely low. The guest judges were Merle Ginsburg and Santino Rice, who I don't have the time or interest to introduce. And the camera lenses all had Vaseline smeared on them, I think. Eventually, the show gained traction within its cult following of logo viewers. Cash prizes increased from $20,000 to $100,000. They got more corporate sponsors, and within just a few years, RuPaul's Drag Race had fully entered the cultural zeitgeist. At one point, Logo decided that they didn't want to be the gay channel anymore, even though that was what made them cool in the first place. What do they even do now? I don't have cable. I'm not 80. So Drag Race moved to VH1 for season 9, but with that move came a larger reach and a larger audience. Arguably, the biggest effect that Drag Race has had on culture and the world as a whole is that it brought drag into the mainstream, and there are pros and cons to that. On the positive side, the best thing about drag going mainstream is accessibility to the public. As you know, there are millions of people who hold a negative perception of drag or just aren't familiar with it at all. Making it accessible to the public leads to education about drag and the queer community as a whole. Education eradicates ignorance, which leads to understanding, and understanding leads to acceptance. Again, the fact that we're even allowed to have a show like this is incredible, especially considering that it's punishable by death in several countries, something the children tend to take for granted because they don't know their history. Yet. It has allowed drag to be recognized as a legitimate art form, and the show offers a massive platform for the contestants to grow their drag careers and put themselves on the map. There's a reason people still audition even after reading the show's contract, which I don't have the time to get into today, but good God, she is beastly. But there's always two sides, right? The biggest downside to drag going mainstream is simply, you guessed it, capitalism, more or less. When something becomes mainstream, it becomes commercialized and exploited like everything else. We've seen what happens when any other art form becomes commercialized and exploited, whether it be movies, TV, music, or whatever the fuck. Since it is an art form, drag is no exception. Even with the success that the queens might get after being on the show, it comes with the inevitable reality that they soon will be treated like a product or service to be bought and sold. I'm extremely happy for all the queens who do find success after the show, but it saddens me to know that they're going to be exploited just like any other artist who just wants to be able to pay their bills. Drag is a radical form of self-expression. It's inherently political, and it's punk as fuck. The drag scene is based in an underground where queer people of color created a community and culture that was unique to them. The scene was taboo to the rest of society because just existing as a queer person or a person of color is taboo to society. And it actually still totally is. Where the United States has introduced over 300 anti-LGBTQ bills in just the last year, and are passing statewide policies that ban critical race theory from being taught in schools and universities. But while queer people and people of color are still being actively oppressed, RuPaul and his Drag Race are making more money than ever. It's one of the most popular shows on television and has won 24 Emmys. At this point, it's starting to drift dangerously close to corporate pride territory. So yeah, drag is mainstream, but only the drag you see on TV. Again, it's better than nothing. So much better than nothing. But it means that for most viewers, their knowledge of drag does not go beyond what they've seen on Drag Race. It also means that the non-Ru girls aren't shown the same support or appreciation, even though nearly every Ru girl started out the same way. The only difference is that they're on TV now, and that's really all it takes. So that brings us to why I, Coke F. Francis, have personally decided to stop watching Drag Race after well over a decade. Ever since I accidentally discovered it at 2 a.m. back in 2009, the transformation has been drastic. Some for the better, some for the worse. Basically, the contestants improve and are held to higher and higher standards at the exact same rate that the show itself declines. It's like mathematical. And I don't want to sound all old and be like, nah, the show isn't what it used to be. But the show isn't what it used to be. I believe seasons 2 through 6 were Drag Race's golden years. And not just because Bianca Del Rio and Chad Michaels were there. Get it, it's because they're old. Not only did they still have their fresh, kitschy charm, it had a healthy balance of drama and quality storytelling for unscripted television. There were character arcs, plots, redemptions, and evolutions of the relationships between contestants. They had the first moments in history where real people came out as transgender on TV. There were a few shock eliminations, but it was mostly because of something absolutely bananas happening, like Willem getting disqualified. We're still shooketh by that 11 years later. The original Untucked gave birth to so many iconic moments that World of Wonder will probably send mustache men after me if I show them to you all right now. Hell, LaShawn Beyond was on her season for 2 episodes and produced one of the greatest lines in Drag Race history.
This is not RuPaul's best friend, Greg.
And yes, the majority of the most iconic moments were staged. Of course they were. It's TV. But they worked because because we were given enough time to become invested with the cast and the stories that they had to tell. However, things took a different turn once season 7 premiered, and it is not the Queen's fault. At the risk of sounding old again, the rise of social media obviously had a huge impact on entertainment. Season 7 premiered in 2015 when social media was at its peak thus far, and everyone was distracting themselves with their dumb little BuzzFeed quizzes and Candy Crush invites. It also continued the spread of everyone everywhere sharing their opinions openly all the time. And this is where the rich boomer-ass TV producers learned about the power of engagement. The producers decided that creating character arcs, plots, redemptions, and 3-act structures would take a back seat to what would make them a lot more money in this digital era, aka clicks and outrage. It didn't matter if a decision was good, fair, or important to the story they were trying to tell. If they just did something that was shocking enough, it would get enough people talking about it, because engagement is engagement is engagement. Not to mention the fact that most of the season 7 girls were look queens and then were forced into acting challenge after acting challenge after acting challenge. And then everyone blamed season 7's queens for the change in tone and quality, even though it is, as it always is, just production. Season 7 debuted some of the most talented girls in the show's history. And while people recognize that now, especially with Trixie and Katya's rise to fame, that wasn't the case when it first premiered. As if it's the Queen's fault that Untucked went from being an actual show to being gay mumblecore found footage just for the sake of saving money. But this led to the show's first cracks in its Michelle Visage. Audiences were realizing just how staged the show actually was. The first example of quality storytelling from earlier seasons that comes to mind is Latrice Royale's win in the Queens Behind Bars episode in season 4. The episode was a sitcom acting challenge that was about, well, Queens Behind Bars. It was funny, cringy, and memorable for a number of reasons, from Kenya Michaels being devastatingly miscast, to Madame LaQueer's inevitable elimination, to Latrice's winning performance. And earlier in the episode, Latrice had the opportunity to open up about having spent time in prison at some point, and it was actually her fellow inmates who encouraged her to create the drag persona that we all know and love today. We saw a setup and payoff of 2 defining moments in Latrice's life and career, and her win was a result of her finding humor in her darkest moments. Oh, and her look was absolutely fucking stunning. Compare this to the Madonna Rusical episode in season 12, where Jan and Gigi Goode were the frontrunners. It was established right off the bat that Jan was the musical theater girl. She had dreamed of winning a Rusical for years and delivered a winning performance because she wanted to win so badly. And don't get me wrong, Gigi absolutely turned it out in this episode and exceeded all of our expectations. But consider the night of 1,000 Michelle Visage's runway looks. Gigi looked beautiful. No fucking shit, she always looks beautiful. Her look was also a nice tribute to a different era of Michelle Visage that a lot of us might not have known about otherwise. But compared to Jan's perfectly executed look, not a chance. And so they gave the win to Gigi because they knew it would get people talking about how robbed Jan was, and then it gave birth to this infamous meme. Since then, Jan has totally owned that moment, but that's the difference here. The end goal for the producers now seems to be making memes rather than telling stories. Something else worth noting is the growing generational differences as the show goes on. As Ru gets older, the queens get younger and younger, especially with the minimum age being a mere 21. Now, I know for a fact that the younger queens need to educate themselves on their gay history if they haven't already done so, but gaining that knowledge does take time, and it's the honest effort to do so that counts. I'm still learning something new every day. And then there are times when Ru will make an absolutely ancient and obscure reference and expect queens in their 20s to know what the fuck he's talking about. Like when he kept complimenting Crystal Method's Elle DeBarge hair, which, for fuck's sake, I didn't even know what that was, and I have gay friends in their 60s. Not to mention, none of these bitches even have access to Wi-Fi while they're filming the show. show. And nowhere else has this become more apparent than in the evolution of Snatch Game. The Snatch Game impressions are inevitably going to have newer references that new generations are familiar with, but not necessarily a boomer queen like Ru. And there's always the defense of, well, you can always make a character funny whether or not you know who they are. Yeah, that goes for the person watching at home, but not always for Ru himself. And ultimately, he is the final judge, not us. All it takes for someone to bomb Snatch Game is for Ru to not laugh and for the editors to take that and run with it. That's it. So that brings us to the Snatch Game of season 14, which, as we witnessed, was a shit show. Snatch Game is actually filmed over the course of a few hours and then is edited down to like 10 minutes. Maybe someone did actually do well within those few hours, but it got cut. Or maybe all of their jokes did bomb with their 62-year-old host. Or maybe, just maybe, because the show has gone on for so long and they know how integral Snatch Game is to the show, they were self-conscious about bombing and were worried that they were gonna get the bad edit. Or at least that obnoxious subway rail stock sound. There's really no way to know what happened that day except for what we were shown on TV. And the narrative that the producers decided to tell that day was that all of these talented and often very funny queens bombed in ways never before seen by a Drag Race audience. And then Ru claiming to launch an investigation as to why they all did terribly. It reeks of staged sabotage, and for seemingly no other reason than to just spice things up. After all, it was a bomb, unlike anything we had ever seen. But the queens deserve better. Because it lives rent-free in my head for all the worst reasons, let's talk about the ultimate tragedy that I have witnessed in the entire Drag Race extended universe. Drag Race Down Under Season 1. I truly believe that the producers of Down Under should have not only been fired, but also replaced with just a room full of screaming cockatoos, because at least one of them might accidentally make one good decision, which is better than what the show offered us. From sending frontrunners home for absolutely no reason, to keeping contestants who ultimately had little to offer, to bringing back Art Simone with no given explanation, while sending all the Indigenous queens home without a word. Not to mention, there was practically no incorporation of Australian or New Zealand culture in any of the episodes or challenges. This is most likely because they had American producers create it, and none of them bothered to do any research to make it anything other than the American show that they were already familiar with. And World of Wonder clearly couldn't be bothered to find Australian or New Zealand producers to create it. Australians and Kiwis have some of the funniest and most unique senses of humor, and none of it translated. Predetermined schedules and forced drama just don't work well with their sensibilities. These rigid production structures became the standard once Drag Race got moved to VH1. But this brings us to season 15, which debuted on MTV for the first time and quite literally got the short end of the stick. MTV, a channel mocked for decades for every possible reason in the book, finally had the chance to air an Emmy Award-winning show on its channel. It was MTV's time to reclaim that coolness it had chased for so long and to finally get off life support. And so they made the decision to cut Drag Race's runtime by half an hour for another show called Real Friends of WeHo, which looks like the A-List New York, but with a half-hearted forced attempt at inclusiveness and diversity, which is extremely apparent when it's already a fake show about fake people doing absolutely nothing. And it just colonized its way right between the airtimes of Drag Race and Untucked. Needless to say, fans were thrilled. And what exactly was cut to shorten the runtime to make room for the basic gays? Only the parts that people actually give a shit about, like congratulating the winners, people's aside interviews and reactions, unpacking anything that happened on Untucked, and the mini challenges. And yes, the latter of those are extremely cringy, but they're also a part of the authentic Drag Race experience. Oh, and the fact that they shortened each runway walk to 8 seconds You're probably wondering, but Francis, what did they decide to keep? What they decided to keep was every second of the acting challenges, which not only suck, are overused and widely hated amongst fans, but they're purposefully edited to make everyone just look bad. And not allowing the contestants to bask in their wins or allowing audiences to witness them doesn't just stop at the episodes. It happens to every winner of every season. There's too many shows around the world and too many seasons produced in too short amount of time, making it impossible for anybody to catch up and having to pick and choose which shows they do watch. And the rapid, factory-like production doesn't allow winners to wear the crown and enjoy the spotlight for a while. World of Wonder is making too much money to slow any of this down, which is inevitably going to stretch the producers too thin. And the longer and faster that this goes on, then the more burnt out everyone will be and the worse the show will be. And the queens deserve better. And of course, this critique wouldn't be complete without bringing up Drag Race's infamous online fan base. A big chunk of Drag Race's fandom is very young, as in teens and children. And as children are wont to do, they don't always understand the difference between fantasy and reality. And like with wrestling and other reality shows, they tend to think this shit is real. They don't realize that Drag Race is a TV show with writers, producers, lights, cameras, and editors. Combine that with their parents allowing them to go on Twitter and say whatever they want, throw in a healthy splash of racism, and you've got the toxic Drag Race fandom that we all know and love today. But again, engagement is engagement is engagement. It doesn't matter that these queens are being bullied and harassed and being driven to self-destructive thoughts and behaviors that sometimes lead to them quitting drag altogether. People are talking, and that's all that matters in the end, unfortunately. The more mainstream the show becomes, the more people are going to talk about it, the more shows are going to be produced constantly worldwide, and the more money World of Wonder is going to make, and the more the queens are going to be bullied and harassed and racially targeted. Very cool stuff. Now, obviously, I've never been on the show, and I probably never will be, especially after making this video. So while you've heard my opinions, I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody who's actually been on the show. At the time of me writing this script, season 11 winner Evie Oddly posted this Twitter thread, which sums this all up better than I ever could say. Catching up on All-Star season 8, and I have two thoughts. One, these queens are remarkable. The drag artists are and have always been the lifeblood of what makes this franchise great. All the things we love, the looks, the catchphrases, the memes, the drama, it all comes from the queens. Two, the producers are often the greediest, most calculating capitalist culture thieves. They fuck with real people's lives, career opportunities, and health. They drive themselves home in their luxury cars when their contestants are sleep-deprived, depressed, and drastically underpaid for their contributions to the cultural phenomenon. Then they tell themselves they're good people for showcasing queer content and creating opportunities for us while ignoring the irreparable damage they cause and creating a chokehold monopoly on how drag artists can succeed. Ask any of the drag kings who've never been cast, or the trans contestants who were barred from being themselves until a few years ago when they realized how lucrative that representation was in the culture wars. P.S. They took over a year to pay me my winnings because they conveniently kept forgetting that they owed me $100,000. Let me be clear, I am so thankful for Drag Race. That show changed my life long before I was ever a part of its fiber, but I'm hopeful for a future where queer people have opportunities to flourish outside of a fake competition to make a few rich old gays richer. So ultimately, the main reason I stopped watching Drag Race: capitalism. Before I end this video, I just want to clarify. If you manage to make it on Drag Race, no matter where in the world you are or how soon you're sent home, that is a huge accomplishment that you absolutely should be proud of. I am so proud and happy for you. Like Evie said, you are the backbone of what makes this show great. And that's exactly why I believe that you and the other queens deserve better than you're being given. And again, if you still watch the show and enjoy it, that is perfectly fine. These queens need an audience regardless of whether or not they're on TV. But keep in mind that the overwhelming majority of drag performers and artists are not. And this has led to the Ru girls getting all the gigs. So by all means, keep watching the show if you want, but be sure to go out and support your local queens even more. Or subscribe to them and like their videos or something. I don't know. That ended up being much longer than I intended it to be. Thank you for hanging in there for this rant. Anyway, here's the winning comment from the last video. Carrie Coombs says, "You make me want to slap that like button many times." You too can be featured in the next video. Leave a comment below and I will pick my favorite one and give you a shout out next time. If you would like to see more of my clown mug elsewhere, please consider following me on Instagram or TikTok. My handle for both is @QueenCokeFrancis. If you'd like to see me bully racists, homophobes, and transphobes in 240 characters or less, please follow me on Twitter @RealCokeFrancis. If you haven't done this already, I ask that you please gently untuck yourself to avoid any unnecessary injuries, but mostly so that you're still able to dick slap those like and subscribe buttons as hard as you can. And, of course, as always, until next time,